For the best experience, put on headphones and write a comment, where you are from and what time you are watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe. Growing up in a southern, deeply religious Mexican family, folklore wasn't just a pastime. It was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. Stories passed down through generations served as cautionary tales, reinforcing the idea that if we strayed too far from the path of righteousness, there would be consequences. My grandfather was the staunchest believer in these tales. His voice would take on a grave tone whenever he spoke of El Cucuy, the boogeyman that came for disobedient children. El Cucuy was a shadowy figure that lived in the nightmares of every Mexican child. If you didn't listen to your parents, he'd find you. Then, of course, there was La Llorona, the weeping woman who lured children to the river to meet the same fate as her own lost offspring. Her ghostly cries were said to haunt the banks of many a river, and we were taught to fear the sound of sobbing at night. My grandfather, however, had his own first-hand experiences with these legends. He once claimed to have seen La Lechuza, a witch transformed into a giant white owl, hovering outside our backyard. For a long time, every bump in the night, every flutter of wings, would have us running inside, terrified that La Lechuza had come to collect us. I started to keep track of the names he mentioned, noting how often these dark characters came up in conversation. If my cousins and I were causing a ruckus, El Cucuy would be summoned. If we ventured too far from the yard, La Lechuza was bound to swoop down and carry us away. But as we grew older, the stories faded. My grandfather stopped talking about these creatures altogether, and we dismissed the old legends as something silly. But in his final years, something changed in him. A fear deeper than anything he'd ever expressed took hold. It wasn't just the dark stories that rattled him. It was the dark itself. He became obsessed with what might be lurking in the shadows. The most unnerving part of the last year of my grandfather's life was how he became terrified of the night. He would stay up into the early hours, wandering the house as if checking for something, or someone, that might appear. It wasn't unusual for him to pick up the phone and reach out to my parents in the middle of the night, asking what they were doing at 3 or 4 in the morning. The first time he contacted us, we brushed it off. He was old, lonely, and perhaps just confused. But then it became a routine. Every night, without fail, he'd call. One summer morning, the calls stopped. My mother thought maybe he had finally gotten some rest, but my grandmother shared a different story. She told us that one night he didn't reach out because something strange happened. He said he had smelled something, the smell of sulfur. He was doing his usual rounds, walking from the dining room to the kitchen, and then to the front living room. His house was quiet, save for the shuffle of his slippers on the tile. He never lifted his feet, so the soft scrape was constant. He liked to peer out the window at the streetlight that stood just beyond his driveway, observing the cars parked along the road. That night, as he glanced outside, something caught his eye. A figure in the street. A woman dressed in black, walking slowly down the center of the road. Curiosity got the better of my grandfather, and he opened the front door. He stood there, silently watching, as a breeze blew in, and with it came the smell. The scent of sulfur hit him like a wall, pungent and overwhelming. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the faint fragrance of roses. He froze, not moving a muscle, unsure of what to make of it. The woman turned toward him. She was small, elderly, and somehow featureless. Her face was covered in shadows, though she stood directly in the glow of the streetlight. A black lace veil framed her face, the only detail my grandfather could remember. She looked right at him and began shuffling toward the edge of the driveway. My grandfather couldn't move. As she drew nearer, the rose scent grew stronger. Her face, previously hidden in darkness, began to take on form. Eyes sunken deep beneath her brow, a small mouth, and elongated cheeks that stretched her face into an almost unnatural oval shape. She stopped at the driveway, as if something was holding her back. My grandfather said it seemed like she was trying to step closer, but couldn't. A low buzzing sound filled the air, like static or an insect swarm. Was she speaking? Singing? Even? He couldn't tell. She was close now, too close, but still, she couldn't cross the line. Something was keeping her out. And then, just as suddenly, the buzzing stopped. Her face darkened again, becoming a void. My grandfather could barely make out glowing eyes before she let out a shrill sound and retreated back into the middle of the street. She disappeared into the shadows as if she had never been there at all. For weeks, this scene repeated. Every night, my grandfather would catch sight of the woman, and every night, she would stop just short of the driveway. He told no one. Who would believe that a figure, smelling of roses and sulfur, was walking down the street at 3 in the morning? But the strange smells became a regular part of his life. The scent of sulfur lingered in his nose, so much so that he began using menthol nasal sprays, going through one a month, and later, one a week. His fear grew worse, culminating in the day he was admitted to the ICU. During the holiday season, my aunt saw her too. She was getting up in the middle of the night for a glass of water when she heard a song. A soft, rose-scented melody. She reached the door and saw the woman standing in the driveway, the same eerie smell of sulfur in the air. She didn't dare approach. Instead, she backed away and went to bed, too frightened to investigate further. By February 2009, my grandfather's health had deteriorated. He lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines. In his delirium, he kept muttering about the smell. He said he could smell the devil's perfume, sulfur mixed with roses, and that it was walking the streets, trying to lure people out of their homes. He said the figure was no longer on the street, but was coming to him, emerging from the walls in his hospital room. When my aunt heard him talk about the woman again, she was shocked. No one else had mentioned the sulfur-scented stranger until that moment. What was once just a family legend now felt disturbingly real. It had happened to 2 of them. In March 2009, my grandfather passed away. At the funeral, as the priest spoke about peace and reuniting with loved ones, I felt uneasy. I remembered the dream I had the night he died. I saw the woman walking down the street, smelled the roses and sulfur, and when she turned to me, her face was a void. Just like in my grandfather's stories. Later, at the cemetery, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A small, frail woman standing near a twisted mesquite tree. She was watching. Her face was hidden. I couldn't make out her features, but the breeze carried a scent. Roses. And then, briefly, sulfur. When I looked back, she was gone. The smell vanished with her. To this day, every now and then, I hear the sound of shuffling feet and smell roses. And I never look up to see if she's there.